What was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? Story 1 years ago, I was on a cross-country trip solo to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but there was horrible weather. It was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted, in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off of a fairly back road state road. It was obviously small and dirty, but would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where check-in was. The guy there eyed me up. Then a college-age girl asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my identity document and credit card, but he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I scrounged together just enough cash, and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty, barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom. Then I flipped up the mattress, dirty, signs of bed bugs. A moment later, I saw a cockroach. That was it, I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least, and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my sport utility vehicle. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside, and glanced out to see the guy from check-in standing outside. It was now around 3 in the morning. He finished up his call, then walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. The lights did not turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing with another guy. I had not seen Guy 2 enter, so I still do not know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my sport utility vehicle. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered in the back seat, but between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he did not notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more, the one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up the sport utility vehicle. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but did not want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had closed down only days before I called. Story 2. When I was in university, I had a summer job in the town by my cottage and spent the summer living there alone. One night at about 11, I was watching television when an 18-wheel truck pulled into my driveway. Keep in mind, this is a pretty isolated area. I stood inside for a couple of minutes, deciding what to do while this huge truck was idling with its headlights shining into my front window. Instead of hiding, I grabbed a butcher knife, stepped onto the deck and yelled, "What do you want?" It turns out my neighbor forgot I was living there during the week. No car, biked to work, and told his visiting friend, a long-haul trucker, to park there overnight. The poor, unsuspecting man was checking in with his wife on the phone when I emerged in a nightie, with a panicked look in my eyes, holding a knife. This was likely also one of his scariest experiences. Story 3. Definitely the weirdest thing was the night after my dog was put down. He was not allowed on my parents' bed, but sure enough, when we left the room, he would jump up and mess with the covers. My dog was put down in the morning pretty suddenly, so my mom did not get a chance to make her bed. When we got home after a bit of grieving, my mom started to do her daily chores, and this included making the bed. I was in the room when she made the bed, and it was perfect. We both left together and watched some television with my dad, and we were the only three in the house. After whatever we were watching was over, I saw my mom walk down the hallway, and as soon as she saw her bed, she screamed. The covers were the messiest they had ever been. This happened for a couple days right after, and then just stopped. My family is completely convinced my dog's spirit stayed around for a few days after he died. Story 4. It was my senior year of high school. On a warm May evening, I was getting ready for bed when I heard yelling coming from outside. I ignored it until I finally crawled into bed. It was not long after I closed my eyes that I heard someone yell through my open bedroom window. I was confused, so I got up and looked out my window. There was my neighbor standing at the fence that divided our yards, looking up at my open window. I was pretty frightened, and I contemplated whether or not I should tell my parents. But it was dark, and I did not know whether or not my neighbor was yelling at me or at someone else that I could not see. I did not know him very well. We had never spoken before, and I did not think there was any real reason to make a fuss over it. The next morning, I was home alone getting ready for school. I saw my neighbor walking around in his yard, and we made awkward eye contact through my living room window. I did not think anything of it. Close to 8:30 that morning, I heard my dog in our backyard barking, and it started to sound vicious. As I was in the bathroom, I heard the back door open. I casually thought it was my mom, but in the back of my mind, I had a strange feeling it was my neighbor. My instinct was right. To this day, I am grateful I listened to that small voice in the back of my head. We met in the kitchen. There he was, standing several feet from me, holding an 8-inch kitchen knife. I will never forget the look on his face. He looked afraid, almost as if he did not want to go through with what he was going to do. At the same time, he had this unhinged look in his eyes. He said, "Do not move." The only thought going through my head was, if you want to live, run now. You know those nightmares where someone is chasing after you, but your body feels heavy? That is how my body felt at that moment. I wanted to faint, and I am thankful that I did not. As I ran out of the house, I remember screaming, "No," repeatedly. I fell down the front stairs leading up to our porch, got up and knocked on several different houses before someone finally answered their door. My town's entire police force showed up. The guy ended up going back to his house. He was an unsuccessful recovering alcoholic and had drunk 2 liters of vodka the night before. He admitted to the police that he had been watching me through my bedroom window for months. When the police searched his home, they found photos of me that he had taken that described in explicit detail what he wanted to do to me. Story 5. This happened around 3 years ago. I was living with a roommate and going to school, and I was around 22. I am a female. It was a weekday evening, and my roommate had informed me that she was going out dancing and staying over at another friend's house. She had invited me, but I did not really feel like going. Instead, I made plans to sit and watch television and work on homework. Around 10 in the evening, I went to the gas station to get some candy and energy drinks. I remember that day pretty well because I had gotten out of classes pretty early and had just gotten my hair done, and I was feeling pretty confident and cute. I went into the gas station, and there were 3 probably in their 20s guys just lingering around. They looked like average college boys, and I remember that one had shaggy blonde hair and was covered in tattoos. I noticed one of them nudge the other and nod in my direction as I picked out my snacks, but I did not pay much mind. They paid before I did and left. After I got my stuff, I walked out to the parking lot and saw them sitting in a beat-up, worn-out car, and all 3 of them seemed to be staring at me. I got into my car and headed back to my house, which was only a few minutes from the gas station, and they started their car and followed. I did not think much of it, assuming they were heading in the same direction as I was. However, I lived pretty deep in a subdivision with many turns, and after a minute of pulling in and making several turns, I noticed they seemed to be following me. I got nervous since I knew I was home alone, so I kept driving past my house. I pulled out of the neighborhood and back onto the main road, and they were still following. I drove for a while, and they sped up and really started getting close. Then they started flashing their lights and actually pulled up next to me and rolled their window down. The part of me that believes in people thought that maybe I had a low tire or something, but when I looked over and saw them staring at me, I knew it was not anything like that, and I immediately began to panic. We were on a more deserted stretch of road now, and they were swerving as if they were going to hit my car, but I sped up. All I could think was if I should drive to the police station, which was about 15 minutes away from there and had many stoplights on the way, and what if I had to stop and they blocked my car? Fortunately, I was getting close to my sister's house. She lives close to me, about 15 minutes away, but in the opposite direction of the police station. My hands were shaking and I was trying to navigate the road with these men speeding up and slowing down and trying to push me off the road. But I picked up my phone and dialed my sister. She answered on the 4th ring. Without preamble, I immediately asked her if Josh, her husband, was home. She sounded confused, but said yes. Josh is in the military and I knew he owned firearms. He is a good guy, but we did not talk much and I never felt particularly close to him. I told her to have him get his firearm and come out to the driveway. By this point, I was near tears. I dropped the phone, and one of the men threw something, I think a plastic bottle, at my driver's side window when they sped up near me. I finally saw my sister's house and pulled into her driveway. The entire house was dark, no porch light, nothing. I was terrified. I had misheard her. They were not even home, and there were no neighbors close enough to run to. The guys pulled up behind me so I could not back out of the driveway, and they all jumped out. They all started walking up to my car, and one of them even reached for the handle and yanked on it. By this point, I was fumbling for my phone again. I wondered if I had a weapon, if I should grab my phone and run, if I should back my car into them or stay locked inside. In the split second that I looked up, two things happened. First, I made eye contact with the shaggy-haired blonde guy who was the one yanking on my door. He did not look angry or drunk or anything. His eyes were cold and predatory. While I was frozen in terror, he looked emotionless, as if he had done this kind of thing before. The other guys were trying my other doors, but I could not break eye contact with the blonde, who was inches from my face and only separated by a glass window. Second, I finally saw a shape move behind him in the darkness, and I heard a loud bang. All the guys stopped and looked, and my brother-in-law stepped out of the shadows, coming from behind the house. He pointed his firearm at them and told them to leave immediately. They ran back to their car and sped off, shouting profanities at him and at me. When they left, my sister ran outside and brought me in. The driveway scene sounds in writing like it took a long time, but in reality it was only a few minutes. Because of that, and because of how dark it was, we did not get the guy's license plate number. We called the police, and they came to get our statements. They said they would have someone patrol the area to watch for any cars that matched their vehicle, but that it would be difficult to catch them without the license plate number. Nothing ever came of it. They never caught those men. I can only wonder what they wanted with me, what they were planning, or what would have happened if Josh had not been there. Story 6, I was living with my sister and her husband in Las Vegas. It was a one-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a 3-story complex. One day I was getting ready for work and called my sister because I was looking for nail clippers. Both my sister and her husband had already left for work, so I called her and asked if she had any. She told me she had one on her dresser, so I went to look for it, and that is when I heard a voice asking for help. It was clear and sounded like a young Caucasian male. I am of Mexican descent, and my brother-in-law is from South America, so I was confused and looked around. Again, it was a one-bedroom apartment, and it was not very big, so it would have been easy to spot an intruder. I did not see anyone, so I went back to look for the clippers. There it was again, the male asking for help, asking if I could help him. I asked who was there, and he asked for help again. I told him I was sorry, but I had to go to work, and that was that. Fast forward to the end of my shift, and I was home from work. I told my sister about someone asking for help, and she asked if it sounded like a young male. At first, I thought I had already told her, and she was repeating it to me. I asked if I had already told her, and she said no, she had heard it too. I thought she was joking, so I did not think much of it. My brother-in-law came home from work 30 minutes later. My sister then asked him who she thought I had talked to that day. He turned pale and got a stern look on his face. He asked if the young guy had asked me for help. Now I was freaked out because he had just walked in and immediately knew what had happened. My sister was watching television and did not have her phone near her, so there was no way she could have told him. I never heard anything else after that, but it was unsettling that they had both experienced the same thing before. Story 7. I have a friend who lives about 90 minutes north of me, and he comes down to spend the weekend at our place every couple of weeks. We do an activity on Friday night up his way, and then drive back to my place together at about 1 in the morning. One Friday night, we were driving down the bypass to the highway, and he suddenly startled in his seat and commented that for a second, he thought we had both died and would be driving down the bypass forever. It was a morbid thought, but I just laughed and told him it would be awful to be driving down a bypass for all of eternity. He commented that he would not want just me for company forever, so he would probably start haunting other cars, jumping out in front of them to cause an accident so we could have some company on the bypass. We dropped the subject not long after, and by that point we had turned onto the highway. About 10 minutes later, I went over a crest on the road and had to slam on the brakes because there was a man who had just jumped out onto the road directly into the path of my car. At first, I thought I planned to stop, and then I guess I either got spooked or realized I could not stop in time to avoid hitting him, so I pulled into the other lane to go around him instead. I looked in my rearview mirror to see what he was doing, preparing to comment on it, and then realized that he had gotten into a car and started driving. He ended up tailgating us down most of the highway until I got freaked out and took a random exit. He put his turn signal on as though he was going to take the same exit, and then he pulled into the other lane instead and sped away. I do not know what was going on, and it was probably not nearly as spooky as it seemed at 1:30 in the morning, but I did not sleep well that night. Story 8. Sometimes when I'm going to sleep, I like to keep track of how strange my thoughts get right before falling asleep. Usually within a few minutes before I drift off, my thoughts become a bunch of non sequiturs, ideas that do not make sense, but it is interesting to listen in. A year ago, I was going through a difficult time. My girlfriend had left me for another man, work was terribly stressful, and I found a new apartment only a few days before my lease was up, and I had to move out. A day or two before I had to move out, all my belongings were moved, and I was sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. The bedroom had no lights and felt empty. I was falling asleep and paying attention to how strange my thoughts were becoming. Nothing unusual, just random thoughts and phrases popping through my head, when all of a sudden, clear as day, I heard what sounded like a voice just a few feet away from me. I remember it saying that they should cut me open, then realizing I could hear them. I immediately snapped up, and of course there was nobody there. It was just a frightening auditory hallucination, but it felt absolutely real for a few seconds, made worse by how strange my home felt at that moment. Story 9. I used to babysit at this really nice house that was about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. About 15 of those miles were on random gravel roads, so it was pretty isolated. A well-known billionaire in the community built the house when he started making his money. He was a really tough guy who put his business before his wife and family. Later in life, as his health declined, he began to regret that. It was too late, though, as he had damaged most relationships with his children. I only know this because my dad employed his daughter, who had mental challenges, and had become close with his wife. Anyway, he died, and I am not exaggerating when I say he was haunting the house he built. I was at this house at least a couple times a week, and frightening things started happening as soon as he died. The dog, who was normally calm, refused to come inside for weeks and would just run around the house in a panic. He would stand outside the window of an empty room and bark and growl. The 2-year-old started saying he was scared all the time and would get up in the night to check on his baby brother. He had never done that before. There were two things that truly scared me. It was really late, probably 2 in the morning, and the phone started ringing, but not in the normal way. It was a constant ring without pauses. When I tried to answer it, there was only a clicking noise. And as soon as I hung up, they all started ringing again. The screen on the phone did not change either. It did not register an incoming call at all. It just kept displaying the time and the number of missed calls. I had to manually turn the ringer volume off on each phone so it would not wake the boys. The second thing was when I heard something in the main living room and assumed the older boy had woken up. As I was getting up to check, I heard a crash, and when I got there, a tall vase holding fake plants was on the ground, and no one was in the room. The boys were both in bed, and the dog was asleep in the garage. I know it sounds unbelievable, but these things happened. Even if they had not, the way I felt in the house would have convinced me it was haunted. I have never felt so uneasy in my life. It was like I could not relax. I finally started having either my boyfriend or my male best friend come with me. They both felt the same way about it. Anyway, that is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me and why I fully believe in spirits now. Story 10. Some friends and I went camping by the lake one night. At about 1:30 in the morning, we heard rustling in the bushes and assumed it was a rabbit or something. We went over to check it out and found nothing. At about 1:35 in the morning, a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blasting loud music drove by on a dirt road very slowly, shining a large police-grade spotlight on me and my friends. The truck burned out and kept driving, so my best friend and I decided to drive up the road and see if we spotted anything unusual about the truck. We got to the main road, and there were about 7 or 8 police cars, lights flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stopped to turn around and, like something from a horror film, an officer tapped on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere. He asked what we were doing. We told him we were camping and told him about the truck. He said that we might want to camp somewhere else because there had been a triple homicide there, and they had not found the suspect. My friend asked if we should be scared, and the officer said he was not scared, but there were 20 officers there, and they were all armed. I said yes, sir, and drove off back to the campsite. My best friend called the rest of our group and told them to pack up the gear, not to ask questions, and that we had to leave. We threw 2 fully pitched tents into the back of one of our trucks and left immediately. The officers located the suspect about 30 minutes later at our campsite. Story 11. I was almost kidnapped when I was 4, and it is one of my most vivid memories. I lived in a very small town growing up, less than 10,000 people. I have a little brother who is 2 years younger. My grandmother used to watch us often. When I was between 4 and 5, I was taken by a man who thankfully did not get far with me. My grandmother took my brother and me to the laundromat early one morning. Next door to the laundromat was an arcade. I am in my late 30s now. The lights from the games were on all the time, and they were fascinating. I convinced my grandmother to let us go outside and look in the windows of the arcade. At this time, a man approached my brother and me and asked what we were doing and where our mother was. I cannot remember the exact words. At some point, he grabbed my hand and began to drag me away. I can still remember how his hands felt and his tight grip on mine. He pulled me into the parking lot and toward a park. The park was higher than the parking lot, and there was a small retaining wall, maybe 3 feet high, separating the two. I clearly remember being pulled up the wall onto the ground above and looking over my shoulder to hear and see my grandmother shout. He dropped my hand. I am not sure what happened next, but sometime later, I know the police came. I remember them talking to me, my brother, and my grandmother. I remember what I was wearing, that my hair was in pigtails, and that my little brother was wearing brown corduroy pants and a white turtleneck. As I have gotten older, I realize this is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. Story 12. Some strange things have been happening around the house lately, not the usual house sounds. Someone gave a loud knock on the door, but when my boyfriend opened it a few seconds later, no one was around. This is unusual because our house is isolated at the bottom of a long, steep driveway, not exactly a good place for someone to knock and run. My boyfriend also would have seen someone heading back up the path if anyone had been there and left. It gets stranger. Every now and then I hear someone entering the basement, which is only accessible from outside, banging around a bit and walking out again, slamming the door. If it is just someone snooping, they are not being very subtle. There is nothing down there to steal. The basement is extremely unsettling, and whenever I am down there doing laundry, I feel a constant need to look over my shoulder. I do not get that feeling often. The last 2 nights have bothered me the most. The night before last, I came to bed and noticed the items on my bedside table had been moved. I have a lamp and a pile of books with a small bowl on top filled with dried rose petals. The top book had been moved to a clear spot on the table, and the petals had been carefully scattered around it. I brushed it off as something my boyfriend might have done, but he did not know anything about it when I asked. Last night scared me the most. I was in bed with my boyfriend and thought my cat had jumped up because I felt something walking around my legs, weighing down the mattress. He is a heavy cat, so I thought it was definitely him. But there was no cat on the bed at all. It was not my boyfriend either because he was lying still next to me. I should have turned on the light, but I could not bring myself to do it. Story 13. Quite a few years ago, I found myself working at a historical jail, a prison museum, as a guide and administrator. This place was one of the oldest buildings in town and had quite a reputation among ghost hunters, so it was always eerie working there. The early days had been violent, and there had been several deaths, including state-ordered hangings, so stories were common. While I did see some strange things during my time there, the building was old, full of wildlife, and far from windproof, so any stories had to be taken cautiously. We also had several dozen mannequins set up in traditional poses, a few gathered in the courtyard, some in the cells, and it was always amusing to hear the gasps from tourists when they saw the first one looming in the hallway. Now to the story. As this was primarily a tourist town, the winter months were quiet, and I could go hours without seeing another person. One day I had a late closing shift and an early morning opening the next day. Both closing and opening required a flashlight, as it was pitch black at this time of year, and lights were not installed throughout the entire complex. I had only one tourist that day, so to counter boredom, I decided to take one of the extra mannequins from the storeroom, dress it in early convict ladies' clothing, and set it up in the kitchen in the ladies' wing. I positioned it facing away from the door, holding a bowl in one arm and an egg beater in the other. I made sure everything was steady and closed the kitchen for the night. The next morning I arrived at 6 in the morning to open up and was making my way through the complex when I heard something strange. The room I was in shared a wall with the kitchen, and there was an odd scraping noise coming from the other side. As I stood there listening in the dark, it stopped, started again, and then grew louder, accompanied by a tapping noise. A little unsettled, I continued around the building, which was set up in a circular shape with rooms on the inside, making my way slowly toward the kitchen. As I stood outside the door, I could hear the irregular noise clearly and decided to look through the sliding hatch first. The mannequin was moving, not just slightly but visibly tapping its foot up and down as it slowly turned the egg beater, its arm raising and lowering. As my eyes adjusted, my brain struggled to understand what I was seeing. Whether it was possession or something else, I was not staying long enough to find out. I slammed the hatch shut and ran back the way I came, not stopping until I reached the main office where I locked the door and turned on every light I could find. At around 10 in the morning, our first tourist arrived. By then, I had convinced myself I must have imagined everything. It was dark after all. Knowing I had to open the kitchen, I put up a back in 5-minute sign and made my way quietly to the door. I slowly opened the hatch and saw the mannequin standing exactly as I had left it. I breathed a deep sigh of relief and opened the door. The second I opened it, the mannequin began turning the egg beater again, frantically tapping its foot. I have never been more terrified. It was broad daylight. I could not convince myself it was my imagination. I was alone in a jail with a seemingly possessed mannequin, and a tourist was about to walk through that room. I remember thinking I should destroy it and run, as I picked up a meat mallet and walked hesitantly toward it. As I got closer, it began moving faster until I was within reach. Expecting it to turn and attack, I grabbed its arm only for the mannequin to erupt into a loud croaking hiss. I nearly panicked completely, but something about the sound seemed familiar. Regaining a bit of composure, I looked into the bowl the mannequin was holding. Looking up at me, with its head stuck between the beaters, was a large skink about 40 centimeters long. I took my hand off the mannequin, and the skink began running. Stuck as it was, it ran in circles in the bowl, which turned the beater attached to the mannequin's arm, which caused the whole thing to move and tap its foot. 5 minutes later, I was releasing the poor creature into the courtyard while laughing hysterically. And by the end of the day, the mannequin was back in storage just in case. I like to think I scared the skink as much as it scared me, but deep down I know I will never be more terrified than by that lizard. Story 14. My uncle used to live with my family part-time. His own apartment was in Japan, but he spent almost every other month living with us in the United States. He had his own bedroom at our house and left most of his belongings there, so he did not have to pack large suitcases every trip. He was very close with my dog and would spend all day with her when my parents were at work and my brother and I were at school. But since he routinely left for long periods, my dog was used to his absences and did not panic if he did not appear for a few weeks. Unfortunately, during one visit, my uncle had a sudden heart attack in the middle of the night. He managed to wake my parents so they could take him to the hospital. When he arrived, he underwent intense surgery that left him brain damaged and unable to leave. He stayed in the hospital for over a month, but my dog remained calm and clearly assumed he had gone back to Japan. The night he died seemed normal at first. My parents received a call and left for the hospital, and I stayed home with my friend and played with my dog outside. Hours later, my parents called to tell me the news. My dog was in another room, and the phone was not on speaker, but somehow she knew. She immediately started howling and crying, ran to my uncle's room, dug through his closet, and began rubbing her face in his shirts while whimpering and breathing heavily. It was the most eerie and heartbreakingly emotional thing I have ever seen. Story 15. I have told this story before, so I will keep it brief. In high school, my brother and I shared a bathroom. He woke up earlier than I did, and whenever I heard him get in the shower, I knew I still had 15 minutes before getting up. One morning, the same routine happened. He got in the shower, I woke up slightly, heard him get out and go downstairs, so I got in the shower. While washing, I placed the bar of soap on the edge by the shower curtain, and it slipped over because it was wet. No problem, I would get it later. 30 seconds later, that same bar of soap came flying past the curtain as if thrown, hit the shower wall, and dropped at my feet. My first thought was that I had forgotten to lock the door, and my brother was messing with me. As the younger brother, I was always targeted for pranks. I pulled the curtain open, the bathroom was empty. I checked the door, and it was locked. I had a brief panic about what had happened, but still thought it could be my brother, since our doors could be locked before closing. I jumped out of the shower and ran downstairs to find my brother and dad having breakfast, staring at me because I still had shampoo in my hair and was wearing only a towel. I told my brother to stop joking and confess, but he looked confused, and my dad said he had been downstairs since I got in the shower, about 10 minutes earlier. Story 16. A friend and I were quite high, and the only way we could get home was to hitchhike. This was in the city, but where we lived there was no public transportation after 7 in the evening. It was a 10-kilometer walk on a dark, somewhat dangerous road because cars could not see two intoxicated teenagers walking past swamps and factories at night. We were waiting for a ride, and by then it was almost 2:30 in the morning, so our chances were low. We saw lights approaching, and the driver slowed down and eventually stopped. He was an older man and had only one seat available in the front, since he was driving a small utility vehicle with bench seats. I told my friend I could wait or walk. The man became creepy and insisted I sit on his lap in the front. I laughed it off and said no. He did not laugh. My friend and I exchanged nervous looks. The man insisted again. Feeling stoned, tired, and paranoid, I felt my only way home was to sit on my friend's lap. For the first few minutes, not much was said. The man then talked about the area and asked what we did. We gave little information and the conversation faded. A few minutes later, he started talking about the past and casually mentioned serial killers and a man who had terrorized the city, killing hitchhikers, saying he believed the man was onto something and admired him. My friend and I were terrified. Then he wanted to know where we lived and insisted on taking us home. We both lived on the same street, and all the streets in that area were 2 or 3 kilometers long and straight, with few places to hide. We told him we lived on the corner of a street and knew there was a side path through the swamp that connected to another street so we could run home. He dropped us off and we ran. We heard shouting and tires screeching. It sounded like he was driving to the next street to find us. We saw his lights turn the corner and speed up the street we were on. Instant panic. We hid in someone's yard as he slowly drove up the street. 5 minutes later, he was gone. We did not know where. There was almost no traffic in that area. We could hear a car moving slowly somewhere. We ran as fast as we could down a long, dark road. Easily 3 kilometers. My friend lived off a side street and went home. I still lived farther down the long road. I continued walking, feeling paranoid. I heard a car approaching and hid, but it was just someone returning home from work. I finally reached my house and slept. The next day, my friend and I talked about the strange night, vowed to stop hitchhiking and plan better. The next night, we got high and forgot the vow, realized it was late, and had to hitchhike home again. Story 17. Back in my days of teenage delinquency, my friends and I had several different spots around town where we would go to smoke. One of our favorites was a large wilderness preserve on the edge of town. One day, my friend and I had tried several other spots already, but had to leave each one because there were too many people around. We figured the wilderness preserve would be our best option. There were usually people down there, but it was big enough that finding a secluded area was never a problem. After we got reasonably far into the preserve, my friend and I saw a car parked by the river. I had never seen anyone drive down there before and did not think there was any vehicle access. We thought it was odd but kept walking. A minute later, the car drove up to us. The man driving, who looked intimidating, asked to borrow a phone. My friend reluctantly handed his phone over, and the man made an urgent call, talking about how the police had not found him yet and that he needed medical attention but could not go to the hospital because he would be arrested. After returning the phone, he told us he knew we were there to smoke and that he would not call the police on us if we did not on him. He then said he had been involved in a domestic dispute that resulted in him stabbing himself. He showed us the wound and insisted his internal organs were exposed. He did not elaborate on the domestic dispute, but he had a child's blanket in the front seat. I could not see through the tinted windows, but my friend, standing beside the open window, said he saw a small child in the back seat. The man said he did not want to bother us and drove off. We were stunned and had no idea what to think. We planned to smoke, then call the police on the way out. However, just as we were about to start, we heard more sirens than I had ever heard in my life. Suddenly, the man came barreling through in his car, speeding over what looked like a steep embankment or a small cliff. Somehow, without flipping, he drove through the preserve. Seconds later, numerous police officers arrived on foot. They asked which way he had gone and told us to leave immediately. On the way back, we counted 10 police cars in the lot and at least 15 more on the way. I have searched for years but have never found out what happened before or after that night. Story 18. When I was 19, my mom had been experiencing chest pains for a couple of days, and I tried to convince her to see a doctor, but she refused. I did not have a driver's license at the time and had just started a new job, so my mom still made sure I woke up for work and drove me there. On Friday of my second week at my new job, my mom woke me up, drove me to work, and told me to have a good day. At around 10:30, I got the strangest feeling, like someone was watching me and something was wrong. I told myself I was being silly and continued working. When my shift ended, my mom was not waiting for me, and her manager called to say she was late for work and not answering the phone. A friend drove me home, and when I arrived, I discovered that my mom had suffered a heart attack and passed away. My older siblings handled everything afterward because I was fresh out of high school and traumatized after being the one who found her. She died around the time I felt that strange sensation, which still feels eerie to this day. Story 19. This one is unsettling, but here it is. This happened when I was about 15, around 2005. I was at my grandparents' house sitting in the computer room, which was connected to the kitchen and the front entry room. The computer desk faced a corner, and I had a clear view of the living room, kitchen, hallway, and front door. It was about 3 in the morning, everyone was asleep, the lights were off, and it was pitch black. For some reason, I glanced toward the kitchen and saw a huge shadow figure, about 7 feet tall, standing there. I only saw it for a couple of seconds before it moved quickly into the front entry room and hit the blinds so hard they flew open. About a minute later, my grandmother came out asking what the noise was. I told her what I had seen, and she assumed it was the cats, but they were huddled under the table, which was unusual. She looked around and went back to sleep. Then my uncle, who had been sleeping on the couch, asked if I had been whispering in his ear. I told him no, and he explained that every night he heard someone whispering to him, telling him to do things. He did not elaborate. He had struggled with substance use and had recently been released from prison, so I truly believe I saw whatever was haunting him that night. That is my unexplainable event. Story 20. This is the first time I have shared this outside my family, but I have realized staying silent could mean someone else gets hurt. In my first year of university in February, it was 22 degrees Fahrenheit that night, and I had just had my boyfriend end our relationship. I was feeling upset and wanted to take a walk along the river flats behind my dorm. The flats were 17 flights of stairs below street level and completely unlit. I could see well in the dark, had experience defending myself, and was carrying a 6-inch straight blade and a weighted leather sap. Illegal, but I would rather face charges than be unprotected. I was utterly wrong. None of that matters when there are 3 men larger and stronger than someone my height. They wore no masks. In that moment, I knew I might die. I fought back. I broke one man's nose, slashed several times, and even managed one stab. I bit, screamed, and tried to leave as much evidence as possible in case I did not survive. But I was overpowered. There is always someone stronger. A few kicks to the head made sure of that. In a way, I am fortunate. I do not remember the worst parts. The next thing I remember was floating in the Mississippi, caught in reeds, debris, and ice, wearing only the torn remains of my shirt and one sock. I do not remember much of the half-crawl, half-walk for about a mile to the stairs leading back up to the street. The final thing I remember is shuffling into the ambulance bay of the hospital across from the dorm, and the man who would become my doctor seeing me, taking off his enormous jacket to wrap around me, and telling me his name was Miles and that I was safe. When my knees gave out, he carried me inside, demanding a trauma room and immediate help. He stayed with me for the difficult parts, including the exam, because whenever he tried to leave, I panicked. He had been heading home when he saw me. A decade later, I still exchange cards with him and his family, and his children write to me as their aunt. Story 21. Quite a few things have happened, but one that stands out is when one of the children was a newborn and acting a little off. I slept on the couch with them upright and had a disturbing dream about a disfigured man in a top hat with a long nose creeping around our house and trying to get in. I then woke into a sleep paralysis episode where a black cat was trying to jump on the baby. I snapped awake by jerking the little one away from the cat or dream figure. The feeling was horrible, and I will never forget it. I did not go back to sleep and took the baby to the doctor. I was sent home. We went to the emergency room the next day because the baby developed a fever, and it turned out they were very sick and had to spend a couple of days in the hospital. I felt foolish, but I told both doctors about the dream, and while the first dismissed it, the second took it very seriously and said he heard things like that often. The whole experience still gives me chills, but the baby made a full recovery. Story 22. I grew up in a rough neighborhood surrounded by housing blocks that were home to many unstable residents. One night, I noticed a laser light shining on my wall from somewhere outside and brushed it off, assuming it was from kids who often played outside. A few nights later, the laser appeared again, tracing my outline while I sat at my desk. I tried to ignore it, but it kept happening almost every night. I was terrified, but too afraid to tell my mom. One night, a friend was over, and she noticed it too. I told her what had been happening, and we decided to turn off the lights and look out the window to find the source. After a few minutes of watching carefully, we spotted a man in a hooded jumper standing on the open walkway across from our building, shining the laser. As we looked closer, we realized something was very wrong. The man had his pants down to his ankles and was behaving inappropriately. My friend and I screamed and ran out of my room to find my mom. I told her everything, and she called the police immediately. They arrived, approached the man from behind, and he confessed to doing it multiple times. They arrested him and assured me he would not bother me again. For a long time afterward, I lived in fear, which eventually led my mother to move us to a safer neighborhood. Story 23. I used to work long night shifts and commute home alone on a motorcycle between 5 and 6 in the morning when the roads were mostly empty. One morning I was waiting at a red light halfway home when a car pulled up beside me. I looked over because it was the first vehicle I had seen since leaving work. The car had 4 tall men inside, all staring at me, a small young girl at the time, with serious and intimidating expressions. One of the men in the back seat got out and started walking toward me, reaching out his arm while everyone in the car stared. I panicked, ran the red light, and pushed my little 125 cubic centimeter bike as hard as it could go. I looked in the mirror and saw the man get back in the car as it began to speed up behind me. I turned off the main road and saw traffic ahead because there had been major construction on the roundabout. I drove through the construction cones, dodging holes and vehicles, and ran every light from there until I reached home. I think I lost them at the roundabout. When I got home, I hid my bike behind a wall in my front garden and stayed inside near the window with a knife for about 20 minutes before feeling safe enough to put my bike away. Story 24. My wife and I live in a fairly populated city, and in the middle of it is one big park with several worn paths leading to a quarry. We were sitting on our favorite rock overlooking a hill, smoking, when we both started feeling paranoid, as if something was watching us. We figured we were just too high, packed everything into our backpack, and tried to relax. Suddenly, my dog started barking, a deep, blood-curdling bark that our 45-pound dog had never made before or since. I stood up ready to scold him for scaring me, when I turned and saw a man holding something in his hand, sneaking behind a bush about 12 feet behind me. As soon as our eyes met, my blood ran cold, my dog stopped barking, and this crazed-looking man stood there staring at us with wide, bloodshot eyes as if weighing his options. My wife jumped up too, looking directly at him. At first we thought he was just a startled bystander, but then he stood there watching us for what felt like minutes before walking backward into the bushes to stare at us from different spots. He slowly backed away, hiding behind bushes, watching us from each vantage point. We saw him move at least 150 feet away, over a hill, before we ran to the nearest main road and walked 4 miles around the outside of the park to get back to the parking lot. It had been one of our favorite parks where we went weekly for picnics and dog walks, but we have never gone back. Story 25. As a young man, I hitchhiked often and had many experiences that were not great, though most people were decent. One of the worst rides happened after a night of drinking. I was out with friends and usually stayed at their place, but around midnight I decided to hitch a ride home. I lived just off the highway, and someone usually stopped quickly. After a few minutes, an old souped-up-looking car stopped, and I saw 2 men in the front seats. I got into the back, and off we went. I usually made small talk while hitching and tried to talk to them as well, but they only grunted, giving off bad vibes. As the car sped up, I realized we were going dangerously fast, passing every vehicle as if they were not moving. It was not just the speed, but the way the driver waited until the last possible second before swerving past cars with only inches between us. My heart was pounding, and I thought I would die, but none of us said a word. I looked at them and realized they were feeding off my fear. In that moment, I stopped being afraid. I decided that if they wanted to get us all killed, then so be it, but I would not give them the reaction they wanted. Almost immediately, the passenger turned to me and asked how I liked their driving. I calmly replied that it was fine, as if I did not care at all. That took the thrill away from them, and the driver stopped driving like a maniac. A few minutes later, they dropped me off at home safely. Story 26. When I was a kid, my friends and I played football on a field near our elementary school. One night, we stayed long enough for it to get dark, and the field lights happened to stop working, so we continued playing in the dark. As we played, we heard a car drive by on the nearby highway, and a man yelled out of the window in an angry voice, telling us to get off the field. We assumed it was just someone joking around, but it became scarier. Later, a car, possibly the same one, sped off the highway into the gravel parking lot next to the field, swerving to a stop and throwing rocks everywhere. The driver jumped out and ran toward the field. Fortunately, his headlights only illuminated a small part of the field, so we all went silent and ran to different areas. The field was fenced, so the only direction to run was toward the car, which did not seem safe. Instead, we spread out and lay flat in the darkness, hoping he would not find us. I still do not understand how he missed all of us. I buried my face in the dirt, trying not to cry, as I heard footsteps pass my head several times. Maybe he was trying to scare us, or maybe he changed his mind, but none of us were hurt. I doubt he could not find at least one of the 15 or so kids hiding. After that, we never played there after dark again. The field was not restricted or private property, so whatever his intentions were, they felt threatening. Story 27. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was 16 or 17 and living at home with my parents. My dad was working out of town, so only my mom and I were home that week. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a noise outside my bedroom window on our 1-story ground-level house. I froze in bed listening and heard what sounded like a low, creepy laugh. Maybe it was the way the walls muffled the voice, but it definitely sounded like laughing, and the thought still makes my skin crawl. Who laughs while trying to break into a house at 2 in the morning? Terrifying people, that is who. I went to my mom's room, told her what happened, and she grabbed the house phone before we went back to my room to listen in the dark. Maybe a minute had passed since I first woke up. As we stood there, she heard rustling outside my window too, and then what sounded like someone climbing over the gate near my window into the backyard. We ran down the hall to the next room, where they would have landed after coming over the fence, and my mom shouted for them to get out. She said she saw a hand trying to open the already open window even wider. The police arrived, checked around, and said the gate had fresh wood broken off, confirming someone had climbed over it. No one was ever caught. Our neighborhood had seen many break-ins around that time, and my car had been stolen 3 separate times right in front of that house. So it was not surprising that someone might have tried to get inside that night. Story 28. About a year ago, my best friend's dad passed away. My friend and I grew up together, and his dad had been a Boy Scouts leader along with my dad. So I knew him well and always thought he was a great man. My friend was going through a rough time, and I was at his house trying to comfort him and talk things through. We had been chatting for a while when suddenly his cat jumped onto the kitchen table and started meowing nonstop. She kept meowing and tracking something with her eyes as it moved. At first we thought it was a fly or some random bug, but when we got up to look, there was nothing there. Whatever she was watching was moving extremely fast in a U-shaped pattern across the ceiling. I strained my eyes trying to spot a bug, but there was nothing visible. When I focused harder, I finally saw something, not a solid object, but a kind of shimmer in the air, similar to what you see above asphalt on a hot day. It was like a small ball of distorted air with that heat wave effect around the edges. I watched it dart back and forth for about 30 seconds, stunned by what I was seeing. Then I felt this overwhelming sense that it was his dad and said, "Hey, maybe it is your dad letting you know he is here." As soon as I said it, the ball vanished. The cat jumped off the table, and my friend's expression changed completely as relief and amazement washed over him. Later, he told me his dad hated cats but always messed with them in a teasing way. I was never someone who believed in the paranormal, only what I could see, but that moment made me rethink everything and wonder if there is something greater beyond the world we know. Story 29. Anyone who has been on the Navajo reservation has likely heard or experienced unsettling things, especially stories about skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here is what happened. I grew up in a small northern Arizona town between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the country's largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school was tiny, a 1A school with about 80 students each year, so we always had to travel 5 to 10 hours south to play other schools and sports. That meant many long trips across the Navajo reservation, often staying in hotels. But one trip was different. Our basketball coach said the school did not have enough money for hotels, so we would be on the road for about 12 hours straight. I was the only male senior that season. After our game, we loaded onto our bus, Big Blue, and headed home. About 2 hours into the drive, once we crossed onto the reservation, I noticed the bus driver speeding up to around 85 miles per hour, which was unlike him because he always obeyed the speed limit. I could not fall asleep like the others and sat at the back of the bus staring out at the moonlit desert. As I looked out, I saw a figure running toward the bus at an angle and keeping up with us at 85 miles per hour. As it approached, I saw it was humanoid, looking exactly like a person, but with a face painted half black and half white, and glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light. I immediately thought it was a skinwalker. It ran up to the roadside and kept pace with the bus, leaping over sagebrush and rocks while staring directly at me. When our eyes met, I could not look away, as if something held my head in place. The skinwalker smiled, an unnatural grin stretching ear to ear with crooked yellow-pointed teeth. I felt nauseous and panicked. Then it crumpled onto all fours, bones cracking as hair grew across its body, transforming into a coyote within seconds before running back into the desert. As soon as it vanished, I ran to the bus bathroom and vomited food and blood. I told no one, afraid they would think I was crazy, but I confided in my Navajo friend. She said I needed a blessing from the chief, who happened to be a friend. The next school day, he approached me in the parking lot, murmured something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter, then drove away. I have never seen another skinwalker since, possibly because I moved away and now avoid that area entirely. Story 30. When I was 10, my family moved to Florida, and I was encouraged to go outside, explore the neighborhood, and make friends. One day after school, I decided to walk around since no one would be home for about 3 hours. I wandered through nearby streets, looking at houses and lawns, though I did not see any other kids. When I was about 2 streets away from home, I noticed a large African-American man at the end of the road walking toward me with a brisk, focused stride. In my innocent 10-year-old mind, I decided to wave, but he did not wave back and continued staring at me while getting closer. I turned around and walked away, glancing back occasionally, and each time he seemed a little closer. When I turned the next corner toward my house and looked back again, he had shifted into a faster jog as if trying to catch up with me. I bolted, running through yards and jumping fences until I made it home and shut the door behind me. From my window, I watched him look around in confusion before walking away. The whole thing was terrifying. Story 31. In the early 1990s, I was leaving my boyfriend's apartment between Drexel and Penn around 7 in the morning on a Saturday. He had just left on the team bus for an away track meet, and I walked to where I had parked my car the night before. There were no cars anywhere, and signs said they had been towed to a downtown lot due to an emergency sewer line issue. This was before mobile phones were common, so I started walking the couple of miles to the impound lot. The streets were quiet, and after a few blocks, I noticed a car slowly following behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried backtracking down a one-way street to trick him, but he was waiting at another intersection. He rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride. I declined, but he kept driving slowly beside me. I made more evasive moves, but he was always around the corner. I was terrified, lost, and surrounded only by warehouses and empty streets. When I finally saw the lot ahead, he pulled over in front of me and got out, walking toward me. I ran for the lot and straight to the booth where a young watchman was on duty. Shaking and in tears, I told him what happened. Even though he was small and barely older than me, he charged out after the man, who ran back to his car and sped off. The watchman brought me coffee from his thermos and helped me calm down. I wrote down the car's details and we called the police, but Philadelphia had bigger problems then and never found him. A month later, on an early morning walk to the train station near campus, an 8 or 9-year-old girl ran straight up to me, grabbed my hands and sobbed hysterically. She was walking alone to her day camp when a man began following her in a car, then got out and tried to grab her. She fought him off and ran toward me. I saw the car turning the corner. It was the same one from before. I took her inside my building, had the manager call the police, and the doorman and I searched for the car, but we never found it. I went with the officers to bring her back to her auntie's house, and they thanked me as if I had saved her life. That morning was the beginning of my dragon-slaying career. Story 32. A year or two ago, a friend and I were walking home from another friend's house. That friend lived in the middle of a neighborhood that gets extremely creepy at night, with long patches of pitch black, spooky houses, and shadowy trees, and it was about a 10-minute walk out. As soon as we reached the corner of his block, we heard this strange, stilted mix of whooping and laughter coming from up the street, along with slightly distorted calliope music. Describing it does not even capture how unsettling it sounded. Around that same time, a separate creepy thing started happening. A white van that drove by my house at exactly 3 in the morning every so often. There was no pattern to its visits, but every time it passed, it slowed down in front of my house. My bedroom window faced directly toward the street, so I always saw it. Most times it moved just fast enough that I could not get a good look, but over the 10 to 15 times I saw it, I noticed the front windows were pitch black, and through the side window I could sometimes see the faint outline of what looked like a person and maybe a computer, though I could never be sure. The last 3 times were the worst. The first time, it passed my house 3 times within half an hour and even dipped into a dead-end street, then sat at the corner for a full minute. The second time, it stopped at the edge of my neighbor's property, idled there for a minute, then turned into a side street, did a U-turn, and drove off. The last sighting was the most disturbing. I was falling asleep when bright headlights lit up my window. At first I ignored it, but the lights stayed. I peeked through the curtains and saw the van parked directly in front of my house, positioned so everything behind the passenger window was hidden. It stayed there for 5 minutes before slowly rolling past my driveway and suddenly speeding away. The sighting started around the time I heard the calliope music and happened mostly throughout 2015. The last time I saw it was a few months ago.